Previously, we were discussing the Battle of Ahzab, or the Battle of Trench, and that is called Al-Khandaq or Al-Ahzab. And we examined the logistics of where the trenches were dug and how this was a strategy to ward off the enemy, and that's how Allah gave victory to the Muslims. Now we have some historical narrations that indicate, the Prophet ﷺ praised Salman, one of his greatest companions. He praised him in a very famous way. So for instance, Ibn Sa'd, the Sunni historian, in his Tabaqat, has mentioned this. He states that when the Muslims were busy digging the trench, and the Prophet ﷺ had assigned, the Muslims, that every 10 of them would work on like 40 yards of a distance. You work on this area. Salman was very strong in his digging of this trench. He was full of conviction, and sometimes when you really believe in something, you have a lot of strength in it. So Salman was like that. When he was like that, the Muhajirun, meaning the people had migrated from Mecca to Medina, they said, Salmanun minna. Salman's one of us. The Ansar, the people of Medina, said, no, Salmanun minna. They wanted to claim Salman to them. Now Salman was not a Muhajiri or Ansari, because later he came. He was searching for the Prophet from Persia. We've talked about his story before. He traveled and then he arrived in Medina. So he's not a Muhajir or Ansar. So the Muhajirin says, Salman's from us. The Ansar said, no, he's from us. The Prophet ﷺ said what? The Prophet gave that famous virtue to Salman. The Prophet ended the dispute and he said, Salmanun minna ahlal bayt. No. Salman's not Muhajir, not Ansar. He's one of us, the Ahlul Bayt. Meaning that he knows the Ahlul Bayt. He has the ma'rifah of Ahlul Bayt. He accepts the wilayah of Ahlul Bayt. So this is one version. Another version is mentioned in the book of Al-Manaqib by Ibn Shahr Ashub, a Shia scholar. He states that when the Muslims were digging the trenches, they were Arabs, so they knew how to recite poetry. So the Muhajirin were saying lines of poetry, the Ansar were saying lines of poetry, except Salman. Salman was not fluent in Arabic, so he could not compose eloquent lines of poetry. So the Prophet ﷺ noticed that Salman feels left out. Everyone's reciting poetry except Salman. فَدَعَ اللَّهُ أَنْ يُطْلِقَ لِسَانَ سَلْمَانَ. The Prophet made a dua, Ya Allah, make poetry flow on the tongue of Salman. So he doesn't feel left out. Assalamu alaikum. وَلَوْ بِبَيْتَيْنِ مِنَ الشَّعْرِ. Even if it's just a few lines of poetry. فَأَنْشَأَ سَلْمَانَ ثَلَاثَةَ أَبْيَاتٍ. Salman started to say 3 lines of poetry that Allah instantaneously inspired him to say. What did he say? مَا لِي لِسَانٌ فَأَقُولُ شِعْرًا. I don't have an Arabic tongue so I can say poetry. أَسْأَلُ رَبِّي قُوَّةً وَنَصْرًا. I ask Allah to give me strength and victory. عَلَىٰ عَدُوِّي وَعَدُوِّ الطُّهْرَى. To give me strength against my enemies and the enemies of the pure one. مُحَمَّدٍ الْمُخْتَارِ حَازَ الْفَخْرَ. The Prophet ﷺ, who's chosen by Allah, who has all the pride. حَتَّى أَنَالَ فِي الْجِنَانِ قَصْرًا. Until I go to heaven and I'm given a mansion. مَعَ كُلِّ حَوْرَاء تُحَاكِي الْبَدْرَ. With each huriya who basically is like the moon. So he said these lines of poetry, Salman, at the Battle of Khandaq, when the Prophet ﷺ asked Allah to inspire him to say poetry, because the Muhajirin and the Ansar, they were all saying lines of poetry, right? Lifting their morale and working, except Salman. So Salman said these Arabic lines of poetry. فَضَجَّ الْمُسْلِمُونَ. The Muslims were shocked. Salman, suddenly he spoke lines of poetry. So each tribe started to say, Salman's one of us, come, you belong to our tribe. You belong to our tribe. The Prophet ended the dispute when the Prophet famously said, Salmanun minna ahlal bayt. No, Salman is from us, the Ahlul Bayt. So we have these historical reports that this is when the Prophet said the statement about Salman. Now, some of our modern scholars have kind of disputed this, that this is where the Prophet said it. Yes, we have reports that the Prophet said it at the Battle of Khandaq, but they're like, we're not sure if this was exactly the context in which the Prophet said it. Why? They say that the Prophet said Salmanun minna Ahlul Bayt in a more important occasion, because some of his companions were racist against non-Arabs. They made fun of the Persians, and because Salman was very close to Imam Ali alayhi salam, so the Prophet said that to give a testimony that Salman is not an average companion. Salman is with us, the Ahlul Bayt. And later, other schools of thought, they tried to downplay this virtue. Why? Because Salman was known for his loyalty to the Ahlul Bayt. So when you tell them, yeah, but the Prophet has said Salmanun minna Ahlul Bayt, so everything Salman has done is true. Well, yeah, the Prophet said it just in the battle, just to show that Salman is strong, or he can say a poem, for instance. They try to downplay it. So some scholars have said, we believe the Prophet said this on a more important occasion, not just because of a war issue that Salman is digging strongly. Or he may have said it numerous times. One was at the battle, one somewhere else. We have in the book of Al-Ikhtisas and Bihar al-Anwar one narration that tells us when the Prophet said it. It's an interesting narration. It states that Salman, may Allah elevate his status, once came into the presence of the Prophet when the Prophet was in a majlis with his companions. So the companions of the Prophet, they showed a lot of respect for Salman. They greeted him and they told him to sit in the middle of the majlis, like in the prime place, in order to show him respect. Remember, he was old, so he was the elder of the companions, so they showed him respect. Then Umar ibn al-Khattab walked in. So he looked at Salman getting all this attention and sitting in the middle of the majlis. He said, "Man hadha al-ajami al-mutasaddir fina bayn al-Arab, fima bayn al-Arab." Who's this Ajami, non-Arab, meaning of the Persian, who's sitting in the midst of Arabs? That racism flowed on Umar's tongue. So the Prophet ﷺ got up on the minbar and he gave his famous speech. The Prophet said, people since Adam until this day are like the teeth of a comb. Have you seen the flat comb? What do you call them? We have two types of combs. The one that's oval looking with the teeth in it, not that one. The one that is flat like that. What do you call those combs? Do they have a name? Yeah, it's a comb, right? They're small ones, you could hold them and you could put them in your pocket. Have you seen how their teeth are just exactly the same? The traditional ones? The Prophet is saying people, since the time of Adam, are equal like that, just like the teeth of a comb. No Arab person has a virtue over a non-Arab. And no red person has a virtue over a black person. It's only taqwa that distinguishes you. Then the Prophet says, Salman bahrun la yanzif. Salman is a sea, is an ocean. And he's a never-ending treasure. وَكَنْزٌ لَا يَنْفَدْ لَا يَنْفَدْ Salmanun minna Ahlul Bayt. Salman is from us, the Ahlul Bayt. So one other hadith states the Prophet also said it during that incident. So we have beautifully at the Battle of Khandaq some narrations that say the Prophet said Salmanun minna Ahlul Bayt. We also have narrations that the Prophet praised Ammar, according to some narrations. If you remember from our previous bio classes, the Prophet saw Ammar when he was building his masjid in Medina, and the Prophet said, Ammar, the evil and transgressing party will kill you, meaning Muawiyah. Well, the Prophet also said it at the Khandaq. Sahih Muslim, the Sunni source, narrates from Abu Qatada that the Prophet ﷺ said to Ammar when he was digging the trench, and the Prophet kept wiping the head of Ammar, showing him care. He says, بُؤْسَ ابْنُ سَمِيَّ تَقْتُلُكَ الْفِئَةُ الْبَاغِيَةُ. Woe upon those evil ones who will kill you, O son of Sumayyah. So here we have a testimony from the Prophet ﷺ that the evil ones killed Ammar, Muawiyah and his people. Yet, unfortunately, there are ignorant Muslims today or just corrupt Muslims who still defend Muawiyah. No, Muawiyah is a Khalifa, he's a companion, he's a Sahabi, and we say radiyallahu an. Radiyallahu an, look at what the Prophet is saying. So, at the Battle of Khandaq, the Prophet ﷺ praised Salman, according to these narrations, by saying, Salmanun minna ahl al-bayt. He also praised Ammar ibn Yasir.